Welcome to I Read Reddit, your home of pro-revenge stories. Now sit down, throw a shrimp on the Barbie, and just enjoy the ride, guys. You're gonna love these pro-revenge stories. Our first story was posted by user sunnykl, titled The Bad Grocery Place. I've written before about the good grocery store, where I worked in high school. We had a couple of bad customers and a lot of senile seniors, but it was well run with a great manager. The one I worked at for summer in college was the bad place. It was 1994 in a chain grocery store with a truly awful manager who was straight out of business school. This man's was also the regional office director's son, so he was Teflon. Anything that went wrong got pinned on an assistant manager. This awful man's had managed to install his mistress as one of the assistant managers. I only saw her in the store twice, and both times she was shopping. One of the times she didn't even pay. Awful man's paid no attention to people's time constraints. We had a bunch of teenagers there who were attending summer school. He didn't care. He scheduled however he wanted to and left us to swap shifts among ourselves. I personally saw him tell one girl she'd have to miss school because he needed her on shift and she couldn't find coverage. Crazy illegal. He didn't care about legalities. Awful's beliefs was that if the customers would accept it, then it was fine. It was the early days of computerized payroll, so the system would take literally anything with no checks. He made the teenagers work hours they legally couldn't. I'm talking too late or too early, and lots of overtime. If they complained, he threatened to fire them on the spot. That was his answer to everything, and work wasn't easy to come by in that area. There were teenagers in tears because he wouldn't let them take the time for family vacations, or they were forced to miss tests at school. One guy was fired because he went to his sister's wedding. He had in fact warned this awful man's about it months in advance, and it was a holiday weekend, so nobody could swap. This awful man's was very rarely, if ever, in the store his entire shift. He'd clock in, get the few really important things done, then just leave. He'd come back in the middle of his shift to do bank deposits, then be gone again until it was time to clock out. He assigned all his work to the latest Fall Guy assistant or some other random employees. If he was the only manager on duty, he'd leave his badge for overrides on the desk in the office so we could grab it when we needed to override register errors. All of this was massively against company policy. I mentioned in a previous post about how National was pretty obsessed with mystery shopper reports and got them directly from the company that did that stuff. We'd get all kind of conflicting instructions because National's edicts, based on those and our regional director's policies, would differ. Always fun. What I didn't mention was mystery shoppers were trivial to spot. They'd go straight to the bakery to price out a special order cake, then just not buy it, complain about the price, or ask any of the normal questions. They also went to the bathroom, the fish counter, asked for a price check, and also made us unring something they decided they didn't want during checkout. There were other things on the list, but those are the obvious ones that I remember all these years later. My last week at this crap show before I headed back to college, I spotted a blatant mystery shopper complete with notepad. Awful man's had bugged out shortly after open. The mistress was probably busy banging him, the other assistant manager had been fired for the colossal screw-up, and the only other cashier on shift was at lunch. It was pretty dead, as it was late morning, so no big deal really. Except that I decided it was time for this crap show to get reported for what it was. When the mystery woman came up with her price check item, I forgot to hit the price check button and rang it up for real. Ha, whoops! Time to go get the manager's override badge, and so I overrode it. Then I tossed that bad boy so hard it went all the way across the manager's desk and down into the sea of cables behind it in the corner. Ha ha, whoopsie! I'm quite sure that if you went to the tapes, this looked incredibly intentional. It was my last week. You could count the freaks that I gave on no hands. Somewhere around this time, the other cashier, we'll call her Jenny, got back from her lunch break, and I informed her that crap was about to get real. She might want to go home sick if she wanted some cover. Nah, Jenny giggled and wanted the front row seat. Besides, the lunch rush was coming. We had a construction area nearby, and a lot of the guys came for the prepared foods for a cheap hot lunch. We started to get the lunch rush and more of a crowd by the time the mystery shopper woman made it up to my register to check out. Of course, she needed me to unring something for her checklist, so I flipped on the "Help me, Obi-Wan" light. Oh, nothing happened. I called for Awful Mans over the intercom by manager, first name, last name. Jenny caught on real fast and told me just to go get the badge from the office. Awful Mans, first name, last name, must be doing the money drop or something. I pointed out to Jenny that was against company policy. She rolled her eyes and told me that's what Awful Mans had said to do. Now, where was the override badge? Can you see it, Blue's Clues? I headed up to the office and made a good show of looking for it. Called down to Jenny, asking if she had it. Nope. Jenny abandoned the big order she was ringing up and came up to the little office to give a cursory look around. This is where the whole story took a turn that I hadn't gamed out. See, I was just going to give the mystery shopper a very bad visit with many violations to report. There'd been an embarrassing reaming from National and possibly even investigation. Jenny had other plans. Jenny was going nuclear. Jenny apologized to the mystery shopper, but she was going to have to get in Jenny's line now. I couldn't void the transaction or log in to the two registers at once, so I was going to help her pack it up, and Jenny would get the mystery shopper as soon as she could. Now this is somewhat bullcrap. While true as stated, we all knew how to unplug the registers to get them to reset us and log us out. It was a dumb hack, but it did work. Thing was, there was almost zero chance Awful Mans or Mystery knew that. This mystery woman must have loved her mystery shopping gig, because she was the most cheerful, screwed over customer you ever did see. She smiled, assured us that everything was fine, and scribbled in her notebook the whole time. Literally, while I'm loading up Mystery Woman's cart at the register, Jenny accidentally rang up a gallon of milk about 6 times. Whoopsie! No card override, no manager, no head cashier with any power either. He wasn't around anymore because Awful Mans decided to fire him in the early days of the store before I arrived. We apologized profusely to the customers, but explained that we had no idea where our Awful Mans was. We offered to check in the back of the store. We then sent a bagger out to check just the lot of the car park in case Awful Mans was on a smoke break. Oh, no joy! As this fiasco rolled on, we had a lot of very unhappy customers on our hands, and the downright giddy mystery woman who stayed to the bitter end. We were demanded to call a manager. We'd tried all of this Awful Man's known numbers. Who's above him? Oh right, that's regional. We were not allowed to call them. Very strict instructions. True, and very against company policy, mind you. Straight from the lips of manager Awful Mans. But we can give you their number. Phone's right over there. Many took advantage. We also got yelled at a lot. But in spite of some sympathy for the customers, we were loving every second of it. Regional took about 2 hours to get somebody down to the store who could clear the registers. Nobody else in the store had permissions on that system. Awful Mans still had not shown up. The regional dude overrode the registers, but by then the damage was done. We'd missed the whole lunch rush. No hot food was sold. Our metrics for the day were going to be unbelievably crappy. Regional dude was on the phone, frantically trying to figure out how to cover up this mess for his boss, which was the Awful Man's father, and decided to blame it on a computer shortage. I think they intentionally broke some equipment to help sell that story. Awful Mans rolled in after I clocked out, but I'm told the regional dude was still there doing his job. Awful Mans was unbearable for the next couple of days, but I had a foot out the door. Jenny, it turned out, simply didn't care, because she'd been there doing the work of a head cashier without the pay. It took a few weeks for the fallout to happen, and you bet I kept in touch with Jenny to find out what happened. From this point, I only know what Jenny told me, as I was back in college a few states away. A few weeks later, an audit team from National came down to investigate. The mystery shopper's story had not lined up with the computer outage story, and something was obviously hinky. They dug into the books and found all the labor violations for miners working overtime and too early, too late in the morning and afternoon. They also interviewed the employees and found out about the scheduling during school time problems, manager absenteeism, no vacations being allowed, and also that the store was constantly short-staffed. Haha, no crap on that one. People ran for the hills as soon as they got anything else. Finally, that an assistant manager was on payroll full-time, but nobody had ever seen her in work. She clocked in and out within seconds of AM every shift she worked, but was never there. Them dots ain't hard to connect. I don't know if they covered up all the labor violations or not. Probably, that would have caused massive fines. I was too young to know to report them. However, Awful Mans, his father, and his mistress all got fired or resigned quietly. The store reportedly went back from being pretty functional after that. Jenny got a better job and left within the year. I never worked retail again. Our next story was posted by user KosmicHQ, titled, "Scammed me with a defected iPhone? I don't think so." So basically, I live in Pakistan, for time period's sake. I wanted to buy an iPhone which would last at least 3 years, so I went to the market in search of one. Now, sellers here are mostly approved by Samsung, Huawei, Oppo, etc. I wanted to buy an iPhone since I lived in America and had American dollars with me. It would have been cheaper to buy a phone here. I decided to buy an iPhone X, not the XS, as it didn't have any major differences. I went to the market and searched a little and found a guy who was selling the iPhone for a reasonable price, 109,000 Pakistani rupees. I checked the phone, inserted my SIM, etc. Everything worked great. He said he'd give me a 7-day checking warranty, and I was satisfied as it was a used phone. 3 days into it, the iPhone had a big problem. It would suddenly drop cellular signals, but Wi-Fi would work fine. I contacted the guy, and he told me he'll call me back. A day passed. I didn't have a spare phone with me, as I sold my old S7. Whenever I tried to call him, the phone would lose signals, and this continued for 8 days. Finally, the phone had its signal back on the 8th day, and I called him. Conversation went like this. "Hello? Yes, hello. Yeah, I bought an iPhone X from you and your shop a few days ago. It would drop signals, and most of the time, like 95%. I would carry a phone without internet or any other way to connect to the internet. Yeah, but your phone is out of your 7-day checking warranty." Excuse me? What? Yes, we don't have to service a 7-day-old phone. Beep! I was ticked off, and I was certain he knew about the phone having the issue, so he sold it cheap. Now, most might say, why didn't I go to his shop? And the reason is 1, the shop is pretty far from where I live, and 2, it's Ramadan and I'm fasting, so I don't have any energy to move from my bed, except to offer prayers. Revenge. I knew this guy wouldn't give me a refund or replace the phone, so instead I went to the market and asked other people if the guy has any other shop that I could go to. One guy told me the address and told me he mostly stays at the other shop. It was perfect. This phone could catch signals for 1 to 2 hours if I take the SIM out and reinsert it, but it's a hassle to do this. I went to his other shop, I sat in my car and removed the SIM and reinserted it to make sure it works. Voila! It does. I went inside. I was new to this area of the market, but I knew the name and the shop number of his shop, so I did find it. I wanted to make it look natural, so I asked a few people around him for the price of this phone. One guy offered 105,000 rupees. Mind you, this was the 256GB maxed out variant. Then I approached his shop, where the guy who scammed me was nowhere to be found. Perfect. I approached the person and told him I came from America and wanted to sell this phone. He said, "Okay, I'll check the condition." I replied with an "okay" and let him do his job. He said, "This phone is in pretty good condition. No scratches on the glass or side rails. to which I replied that I took extreme care of my phones and would keep them protected in a heavy case. He said he was pretty impressed and offered me $113,000 for the phone. I told him, can't he raise the price? He said, no sir, this is the final price. I insisted for him to go at $115,000, and after arguing for a while, he agreed. I gave him the phone and told him I'd like a Samsung Galaxy Note 9 instead of that, which is $80,000 with all the accessories. He seemed pretty happy and gave me the Note 9. He said he would like a 3-day checking warranty in case something was wrong with the phone. I agreed in a frightened tone, but he seemed okay with it. 5 days pass, and I get a call, not from him, I had to give him my number, but the person who scammed me. The conversation went like this. Hello sir, the phone you gave us is giving an issue with cellular connectivity. Could we have a refund? And I say, in the most formal but aggressive voice, frick off! You scammed me for a broken iPhone, now you want me to refund you? But sir, I'd given you a checking warranty of 7 days. I gave you a checking warranty of 3 days. A deal's a deal, and if you have a problem with a phone, get it fixed yourself, as my business with you is over. Boom! In the end, I got my money back and reverse scammed the seller. I got a profit of $6,000, and I enjoyed it by going on a cruise. Our next story was posted by Dictator Iragan, titled, My father's former boss didn't pay him overtime while scamming hundreds of people, so he made him lose over $500,000. A little side note before I begin. I do not currently remember all the details of this revenge story, as everything here happened around 10 years ago. When I have the chance, I will ask my father for more details of the situation. I apologize in advance if things do not make sense as of now, but I will try my best to get as much detail as I can. My father has been working in the auto mechanic industry for around 21 plus years now, even before I was born. This story takes place when he was working for a well-known company that we will call M, and his boss who we'll call Pete. Now, Pete owned several M shops in my state, his most prized one being in the northern area of the state. My father worked in a shop that was a little outdated with its equipment, but it was in a wealthy town. Various police reports were filed against Pete and his managers because of making reports on the cars. This will be very important for later. So to the story. My father started working for Pete in 2006, after he had to quit his former job working for another company with great benefits. He ended up working for well over 70 plus hours a week, with double time, so he couldn't complain at all. He met a really good friend named Frank, and they got along extremely well, and became friends really quickly. I met Frank one Friday afternoon after my ride home from school, and made a quick stop to visit the shop for an oil change. Frank was an extremely nice family man, just like my father, and everything seemed fine for several years. Then, the unexpected happened. My father had noticed that his paycheck had been short for the past year, which is the 2008-2009 financial year, and had started to log his work hours. Unfortunately, my father didn't own any smartphones or any recording devices, as when you're a mechanic, you are paid anywhere from $15 to $25 an hour and are expected to pay for tools that cost thousands of dollars. He went to Pete and requested to know why his paychecks had been short as of recent. This is how the conversation went down, as my dad told me. Unfortunately, our two shops had not been making enough profit on jobs, which is a lie as he opened a new shop, but had more than enough money to pay my father, and we are in tight financial struggle as of now. However, I promise you will get your money within the next year. Alright, but I will not be working any more overtime until I'm owed my time. He then showed Pete the logged times and his hours worked, which translated to $52,000. And Pete says, "Do not worry, I will make sure that you receive your check by the end of the 1-year mark." Fast forward a year and a half, and he'd not received a dime from Pete, and had not mentioned a thing about paying him back. My father was getting irritated by this, but decided to continue waiting. Frank had received a promotion to a manager position, and this is where the juicy information gets relayed to my father. Pete had taught Frank as a manager to scam everyone who walks through the doors of the shop to gain additional income, as it was the unofficial company policy, so Pete could gain additional income, so he could continue living the great life in his mansion. Pete was very wealthy, which we learned through Frank, and ended up having a nice Mercedes. Well, that kind of ruins the dealership's names, didn't it? Several other cars, and went out to 5-star restaurants on a daily basis. My father took this information, along with the several logged police reports for later use. A few months later, Pete told my father that, "I cannot pay you your owed amount of $52,000, but you will still be required to work overtime to get these jobs done. I am terribly sorry for the inconvenience." My father smiled and told him not to worry about it. A scheme was forming, as Pete just oiled the cogs to screw himself over. The revenge. A few months go by, and my father, Frank, and the kid of the shop discuss about taking Pete to court and suing him for not getting their paid overtime, as this was affecting them too. They gathered months' worth of information, and all planned to go to court. Frank was useful, as he had access to sensitive files in his manager position. Unfortunately, Pete caught wind of the operation and threatened to fire Frank and the kid, while immediately terminating my father. The two guys ended up backing out at the very last moment, but my father ended up having all the evidence that he needed. Pete was going to get screwed. My father first brought the logs of his unpaid overtime, along with having the year's worth of pay stubs to provide even further evidence of the overtime, along with bringing up the police reports and the court summoning the victims of the scams. The look on Pete's face was ghost white, according to my father, as he knew that he was done for. The IRS and state led an investigation against Pete because of the victims of fraud, and they found out that he'd not paid taxes for the past 5 years. He was given fine after fine, along with the victims' money to be returned to them, and my father's owed overtime. All of the fees ended up racking up to be a total of $750,000. After a year-long court case, my father ended up winning the case, along with an additional case of wrongful discrimination, as he was fired after Pete learned he was about to be sued. I'll not disclose the exact amount that was paid, but it was well over the $52,000 that he was owed. Don't mess with my father's money, otherwise you're in for a very bad time. Our next story was posted by a user, BurritoGirl88, titled, "One rule when dating me, don't screw me over." So I was living in a small Muslim country at this time, and while Islam wasn't enforced, it is a big part of their culture. I met this guy, let's call him Naz. He is Muslim, but doesn't follow the religion that much. We met through a friend of a friend, or something like that. He drove a nice car at that time, Nissan Silvia S15. Coincidentally, he also played badminton with my uncle. So I thought it was all well and good a couple of months in, until one of my friends told me that he was engaged. Of course, me being the romantic idiot that I am, I had already fallen for this guy, so that's a new bit of information that sent my head for a spin. I was angry and embarrassed that I was showing him off around town, and all that. That afternoon, I received a phone call from his fiancée. I told her that I had no idea that he was engaged, and she didn't seem too upset. Apparently, this is the 3rd time he's done this to her, and this dumb girl kept taking him back. I thought, there's no way this guy and girl are going to learn, so I set a plan. I called him, asking to meet up with him that evening, and I had a surprise for him. I called the fiancée and asked to meet up with her shortly before my meeting with him. I picked her up and made her wait in my car while I met him outside. I told him I knew that he was engaged, and he didn't really care. I said, "There's a surprise for you in the car. Go get it." As soon as he saw her, he tried to take off running, but I blocked him. They proceeded to get into a huge fight, and apparently this girl paid for his car, his phone, and all of their expenses. She took back the phone, a bunch of stuff in the trunk of his car. She then cried, and he cried. I was just enjoying the show. Once it was all over, and she was again in my car, I told her I wasn't done, and asked her to give me directions to his house. When we arrived at his place, the mother opened the door and saw the fiancé crying and asked what was wrong. The fiancé was kind of hysterically crying, so the mum started crying too. Amongst the tears, she asked who I was and I said, "Hi, I'm pregnant with your son's baby." Fast forward to more tears. I sat at the table with the whole family present. The dad was sullen and kept apologizing as he knew my family, and the mum was sobbing with the fiancé. Finally, he came home absolutely shocked to see me there. He sat down and took the heat. The parents, being Muslim and traditional, asked if I would marry his son, and I said, "I'd rather raise my kid an idiot than be around your son." More crying ensued. The dad then got up, disowned his son, and apologized again, saying that he didn't raise his kid to be like this. By this time, I'd probably been there for at least an hour and was getting bored, so I decided to leave. As I was leaving, through tears, he asked me, "Why are you doing this?" And I replied, "I told you in the beginning not to ever mess with me or I'd make you regret it." I saw them about 4 years later at the mall, and they were back together. Hopefully, he never cheated again. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed those stories. Those were pretty fun to do. I didn't do too many voices in those ones, but I think that's alright. Tell me what you think about it in the comments, if we have anything to talk about. And yeah, just have a good day. I'll see you later. Bye.